I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
Yeah, picture the scene.
Right. Picture the vast, just unforgiving expanse of wartime Canada. And not the cities. The wild interior. It's the dead of night. October 1943.
A freezing night.
Freezing. First, picture the dark, churning waters of the St. Lawrence River. Down in those pitch-black depths, German U-boats are silently prowling beneath the surface. They're hunting merchant ships, moving like these steel leviathans just miles from the Canadian coastline.
Which is terrifying in itself.
Exactly. Now move your mind inland, away from the water. Picture the dense, just impenetrable mist hanging heavy over the jagged peaks of the Laurentian Mountains in Quebec.
The isolation there it's absolute.
Feel the heavy, suffocating silence of those endless ancient Canadian forests. It is a wilderness that is incredibly hostile to human life. It swallows sound, it swallows light, and it swallows secrets whole.
It's an intensely isolating atmosphere. When you read the historical logs of the region from that time, it's a landscape that feels almost prehistoric in its complete indifference to whatever is happening in the human world. A world at war means absolutely nothing to the Laurentian Mountains.
The mountain doesn't care about the war.
No, it doesn't.
Now, into that heavy, sub-zero freezing fog, imagine the sudden, deafening mechanical roar of 4 massive Wright R-1820 engines. A colossal military bomber, a B-24 Liberator, is cutting blindly through the dead of night, hundreds of miles off its intended course.
Completely lost.
The engines are screaming. And then a sudden, violent, catastrophic crash. A fireball illuminates the freezing mist for just a fraction of a second. The mountain swallows the flames, the metal, the men, and within minutes, the landscape returns to that eerie, unnatural, absolute silence.
Just another ghost in the woods. I mean, one second it's an apex machine of modern warfare, and the next it's just twisted aluminum cooling in the snow.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you and I are reopening a literal cold case.
A very literal one.
We are pulling out a forgotten World War II mystery that has been buried under the snows of Quebec and locked away in encrypted national archives for over 80 years. We're going to examine declassified military reports, restricted files from the CNR, that's the National Research Council, and the meticulous, almost obsessive investigative notes of a young, grieving corporal named Jean-Pierre Audet.
And what we're going to find in those restricted sources is, well, it's staggering.
It really is.
I want you to prepare yourself, because what starts as a tragic military plane crash, a terrible, straightforward accident of war, it rapidly unravels into a labyrinth of a major defense secret, hidden uranium deposits, direct Nazi infiltration, and institutional betrayal on a scale that is, frankly, hard to fathom.
Yeah.
We're looking at a shadow war fought not on the bloody beaches of Normandy or the ruined streets of Stalingrad, but in the sterile, bureaucratic corridors of Ottawa and the frozen, isolated bays of Labrador.
Okay, so let's unpack this systematically. I want to ground us in the hard facts first. We have to start with the inexplicable event itself, the vanishing of Liberator Harry. Right.
Let's look at the operational logs from the night of October 19, 1943. The setting is the Gander military base in Newfoundland. Now, for those who don't know, Gander wasn't just some regional airstrip. In 1943, this is arguably the most crucial transit hub for the Battle of the Atlantic.
It was everything.
It's the jumping-off point between North America and the grinding war in Europe. The logs describe it as smelling constantly of aviation kerosene, blanketed in a perpetual damp fog, and buzzing with the frantic tension of young men going off to die.
It was a hive of high-stakes military activity. You had thousands of personnel moving through, bombers being ferried across the ocean, anti-submarine patrols taking off constantly. The exhaustion and the paranoia in Gander were palpable.
Right. And sitting on the tarmac that night is a massive Liberator III bomber, tail number 3701. Its official nickname is Harry. It belongs to the 10th Squadron BR. And just to clarify for everyone, BR stands for Bomber Reconnaissance.
Important distinction. This is not a rookie crew taking a training flight. This is an elite unit. Their day job, their literal daily mission is flying out over the freezing Atlantic and hunting down those German U-boats.
These were highly trained, battle-hardened men operating an incredibly complex, state-of-the-art machine. The Liberator was a beast to fly, but the men of the 10th Squadron BR knew exactly what they were doing.
So let's look at the flight details. They're heavily delayed by a brutal weather front. They are finally cleared for takeoff at 10:16 p.m., heading for an airport in Montjoly, Quebec. Now, I have the official military manifest right here in front of me.
The official one?
Yes, the official one. It is typed, stamped, and uncompromising. It lists exactly 24 men. You have the four core crew members. The pilot is a 26-year-old named Jerry Nash. The navigator is a 31-year-old named Alan Morse. The radio operator is just 19 years old, Danny Fowler. And the gunner is a 20-year-old, Maurice Bergeron.
Kids, basically.
Kids. And joining them in the cavernous back of the bomber are 20 military men on leave, heading home for a brief respite from the war. 24 military men. That is the official, unshakable historical record.
A completely routine flight. Until 1:47 a.m. on October 20th, when the plane violently strikes the Montagne Noire, the Black Mountain in Saint-Donat, Quebec. They hit at an altitude of 875 meters, and the official record stops right there. Because after 1:47 a.m., there is nothing but a 32-month silence.
32 months. That is almost 3 full years. And it wasn't for lack of trying, you know? When you look at the search parameters in these declassified files, the scale of the military response is staggering.
Oh, it was massive.
The Royal Canadian Air Force launched 728 aerial sorties. They logged 2,438 hours of flight time spanning over an entire month. Do you realize the logistical drain that represents in the middle of a world war? They scoured the grid, and they found absolutely nothing.
Which leads to the official military conclusion stamped right on the file. The plane encountered severe weather, simply ran out of fuel, missed its trajectory by hundreds of miles, and sank into the deep, freezing waters of the St. Lawrence River. Case closed. Move on.
Move on.
Yeah, there's a global war to win. We cannot spend any more resources looking for a plane at the bottom of a river.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because when you actually dig into the raw, unedited operational logs, not the summary report, but the day-to-day radio logs, there are troubling testimonies that directly contradict that neat official narrative.
Specifically the anomaly.
Yes, specifically an anomaly logged 6 days after the crash. On October 25, 1943, an Avro Anson aircraft is flying a totally different route near the Matawan River. That is about 40 kilometers away from the actual crash site on Montagne Noire. And the crew of that Anson picks up a phantom signal, a faint, manual radio distress signal coming from the ground.
What's fascinating here is the psychological weight of that signal. Someone was down there, someone with a portable radio. If the plane crashed instantly into a mountain and everyone died on impact, which is exactly what the official coroner's report would later claim to avoid paying certain survivor benefits or acknowledging suffering who was transmitting that signal 6 days later.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. A manual distress signal from a catastrophic B-24 crash. The plane hit a mountain at hundreds of miles an hour. It was an absolute inferno. Are we really supposed to believe someone survived, found an intact portable radio in the wreckage, and then hiked 40 kilometers through sub-zero wilderness?
It's a totally fair question, and it's exactly the skepticism the military brass used to dismiss it. But you have to understand the equipment on a Liberator. They carried heavy, reinforced emergency transmitter kits specifically designed to survive ditching in the ocean. They were practically indestructible.
Okay.
And the terrain of the Laurentians is so dense, a survivor might wander in circles, following riverbeds like the Matawan, just trying to find civilization. The military actually did dispatch a small search party to the Matawan River grid based on that ping, but they never found the source. They just closed the file on the signal, marked it as an unresolved anomaly.
Unresolved anomaly. Until June 1946. The war is over. The military is searching the Laurentians for a completely different missing plane, and purely by accident, an aerial crew spots a glint of twisted metal through a break in the trees on Montagne Noire.
Just dumb luck.
They send a ground team in. It's the Harry. It's been sitting there for 3 years. The forest has already started to reclaim it. The official reports describe a scene of absolute, sobering devastation.
And this brings us to this specific piece of evidence that shatters the entire official history of the flight. The recovery team on the ground is led by a young corporal. And what he finds in those charred ruins is a glaring contradiction to everything the government has claimed.
Okay, let's talk about Corporal Jean-Pierre Audace. This guy isn't a super spy. He's not military intelligence. He's a 22-year-old kid from Rivière-du-Loup, a small city in Quebec. But he carries a very specific, very heavy psychological burden.
His brother.
Right. His older brother, Remy, was a merchant sailor who was torpedoed and killed by a German U-boat right in the St. Lawrence River in 1942. Audet knows exactly what it feels like when the military apparatus sends you a sterile typed letter and tells you your loved one is at the bottom of the river while totally censoring the actual details of the attack. He has this quiet, dangerous stubbornness.
He is the perfect rogue investigator. He's methodical, he is deeply grieving, and he has zero blind faith left in the military hierarchy. So Audet is on the mountain in 1946. He is meticulously cataloging the site, numbering fragments of bone, scraps of charred uniform, melted instruments. And then, under a twisted, heavy pleat of aluminum fuselage, he finds it.
A shoe. But not a standard issue military boot. An intact, size 36, high-heeled woman's shoe. Made of premium, expensive leather.
In the wreckage of a military bomber. That, according to the inviolable official manifest, carried exactly 24 men. No women. No civilians.
Now hold on, let me push back on this because I know what you're thinking as you listen to this. A plane crashes into a mountain and it sits there completely exposed to the elements for 3 years. 3 years of snow, rain, scavengers, animals, and potentially local hikers or hunters wandering by. Couldn't that shoe have just been dropped by someone walking through the woods in 1944 or 1945? Why do we immediately leap to the conclusion of a phantom passenger?
It's the context of the discovery. Audet didn't find the shoe lying on a bed of moss near the edge of the site. He found it pinned underneath a massive section of the Liberator's fuselage. A piece of metal so heavy it required levers to lift. That shoe was trapped there at the exact moment of impact in 1943.
So it could have been dropped later.
Exactly. Furthermore, this wasn't a hiking boot. It was a 1940s luxury high heel. No local hunter or scavenger is wearing that up an 875-meter freezing mountain. That shoe belonged to someone inside the cabin of the Harry when it hit the mountain.
And Audet is standing there in the freezing mud of the mountain, holding this piece of premium leather, and he makes a decision that basically changes the course of his life. He doesn't log it. He slips the shoe into his canvas bag. He keeps it off the official recovery report because he realizes instantly if the military lied about who was on this plane, what else are they lying about? Why was this woman's presence hidden from the public?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Audet realizes he has just stumbled onto a thread that could unravel the entire official history of the war on the home front. He doesn't trust his commanding officers to handle it, so he begins a shadow investigation. He starts tracing the ghost.
He takes his notes, he takes that shoe, and he heads straight to the capital, to Ottawa. He starts cross-referencing civilian registries, meticulously looking for any woman associated with the military or government science who abruptly vanished in late October 1943. And against all odds, he finds her, Madeleine Arsenault.
A 28-year-old civilian geologist from Hull, Quebec. The files describe her as brilliant, introverted, highly educated. She worked directly for the CNR, the National Research Council.
Let's pause and clarify the CNR for a second. Today, we might think of national research councils as funding bodies for university professors, you know? But in 1943, what exactly was their authority?
Oh, the CNR during World War II was the absolute nerve center of Canada's wartime scientific effort. They weren't just writing academic papers. They were developing advanced radar systems, chemical explosives, aviation medicine, and crucially, managing strategic resources and nuclear research.
Real cloak and dagger science.
Absolutely. Their files were heavily restricted. To be a geologist working for the CNR meant you were operating at the highest levels of state secrecy.
But according to the civil registries that Audet digs up, Madeleine Arsenault didn't die in a plane crash. She officially died in a tragic car accident in Ottawa in November 1943, just a few weeks after the Liberator Harry went down.
It's a classic intelligence cover-up. But Audet is incredibly thorough. He doesn't just read the death certificate. He physically goes to the Notre Dame Cemetery in Ottawa to find her grave. He locates the specific plot, and what he discovers is chilling. The grave is completely empty.
Empty.
The earth hasn't even been properly settled. There is no marker, no signs of a casket having ever been buried there.
Yeah.
It is a phantom grave constructed for a phantom woman.
How does the government even pull that off? Faking a car crash, faking a burial?
In a time of total war, under the War Measures Act, the government had sweeping, almost dictatorial powers over information. If a defense agency needed a civilian to disappear on paper to protect a military secret, local police and coroners would be ordered to file the necessary paperwork under the guise of national security. No questions asked.
So Audet has an empty grave and a shoe. He goes straight to the CNR headquarters. He walks into this massive, imposing, marble-floored institution of government science, and he officially requests to pull Madeleine's employment file. And he hits a massive, impenetrable bureaucratic wall. A clerk takes his request, disappears into the back rooms for 17 long minutes, comes back out, and hands Audet a pre-typed form. It simply reads, restricted access, ministerial authorization required.
The sheer terror of wartime bureaucracy. They don't threaten him with a gun or military police. They threaten him with a piece of paper. They are quietly telling a 22-year-old corporal, We know exactly what you are looking for, and you will never, ever see it.
But as Audit is leaving, completely defeated, a crack forms in the wall. The CNR receptionist, a woman named Yvonne Tremblay, who has clearly been carrying the agonizing weight of this secret for 3 years, leans over her desk as he walks by. And she gives him the final, chilling whisper that blows the case wide open. She says her name was Madeline, and she wasn't traveling alone.
This raises an incredible, terrifying question. Who was the phantom civilian geologist traveling with on a fake military ID? Because audits continued, quiet investigation reveals that Madeline boarded that flight in Gander with a heavy leather briefcase, a briefcase that was never recovered from the wreckage of the Harry. Remember, audit's team meticulously cataloged that site in 1946.
Every scrap.
Every scrap. There was no briefcase. That means someone had gotten to that crash site before audit's team. Someone has scoured the burnt metal specifically for that briefcase and walked away with it.
And Audit manages, through his contacts, to uncover what was supposed to be in it. It was a classified, highly sensitive geological report detailing the discovery of a massive, high-grade uranium deposit in Martin Bay, Labrador.
We have to contextualize the stakes for you here to really understand why people were willing to kill for this. It is 1943. The Manhattan Project is in full terrifying swing. The race to build the atomic bomb between the Allies and the Axis is the single most critical geopolitical objective on the planet.
Let's do an ELI 5 explain. I'm 5 for this. Finding high-grade uranium in 1943 isn't like finding a gold mine or a new oil field.
No, it's like finding the blueprints and the raw materials for a Death Star sitting in your backyard and realizing the enemy might also know it's there. Uranium isn't just a mineral. It is the most dangerous, highly sought-after, world-altering resource on Earth. Whoever controls a steady, high-grade supply of uranium controls the outcome of the war and controls the geopolitical landscape of the entire post-war atomic age.
So what does this all mean? Let's lay out the pieces of the puzzle Audit has gathered. We have a secret world-class uranium deposit in Labrador. We have a phantom civilian geologist with a fake military ID and a briefcase full of data. We have a heavy bomber that crashes hundreds of miles off course into a mountain. And we have an empty grave in the nation's capital. We are leaving the realm of a tragic accident and entering the gray areas, a vast, deliberate conspiracy of silence.
It is the ultimate institutional betrayal. Audit's notes reveal that operating in the shadows of Ottawa was an unholy alliance, a triumvirate of incredibly powerful men. A private mining consortium called Dominion Resources had actually discovered this uranium deposit in Martin Bay back in 1941, 2 years before the crash. But instead of turning it over to the Canadian federal government for the Allied war effort, they kept it a closely guarded secret.
They hid it. Let that sink in. While ordinary Canadian soldiers and airmen are bleeding and dying overseas to defeat fascism, these corporate and government elites are playing Monopoly with the most destructive element on Earth. The declassified sources name the 3 men behind this. You have the president of Dominion Resources. You have Reginald Holt, who is not just a businessman but a highly respected deputy minister of defense. And you have Sir Edward Cavendish, an incredibly wealthy Montreal banker who is acting as a Swiss intermediary.
This is a classic example of institutional self-preservation and greed. In times of total war, governments pass sweeping acts like the War Measures Act, which are meant to protect citizens, but actually create a dark, unregulated umbrella where corrupt officials can operate with total legal immunity. They set up shell companies in Bermuda to hold the patents to the land.
Now wait, explain that. How do you set up a shell company in the middle of World War II? It's not like today where you can just wire money online.
It required immense physical coordination. Couriers moving paper contracts on neutral ships, bankers in Montreal coordinating via encrypted telegrams with lawyers in Hamilton, Bermuda. The plan was to hold the mining rights in these anonymous offshore shells, keep the uranium completely off the Canadian government's radar, and wait until the war ended, at which point they would own an absolute, untraceable monopoly on the atomic age.
But to maintain that level of secrecy and keep the shell companies afloat, they needed immense capital, and they needed validation of the site's worth. So what did? They committed absolute, undeniable treason. The consortium sold the geological data to Germany via a Swedish middleman.
Selling nuclear data to the Nazis. It's almost too horrific to believe. But Audit connects a timeline that is an absolute historical paradox according to the official records. Because in that exact same month, October 1943, a German submarine, the U-537, surfaces in Martin Bay, Labrador, the exact precise location of the hidden uranium deposit.
Now, the official accepted history of the U-537 in Labrador is that it deposited an automatic weather station named CURT, designated WFL-26. I looked into this. This is a real historical event, but a weather station, like a thermometer and a wind vane. How does a submarine drop that off?
Think of the weather station, Kurt, as a 1940s version of dropping a massive armed Wi-Fi router into enemy territory. It wasn't a little thermometer. It weighed hundreds of kilos. It was a massive piece of advanced telemetry equipment built by Siemens. It was camouflaged with a fake logo that read Canadian Meteor Service to trick any local Inuit or military patrols. It required a crane on the deck of the submarine to deploy. It remains the only known armed German military operation to successfully land on North American soil during the entire war.
But look at the storyteller's extrapolation here. Look at the timeline Audit is building in his notebook. The U-537 lands at the exact remote bay where the uranium is hidden, in the exact same month that the report on that uranium is being flown out of Gander by a phantom geologist. Was measuring the weather just an elaborate cover story?
It is highly probable, almost certain in Audet's mind. The U-537 didn't just bring meteorologists. It brought Kriegsmarine geologists. Their true mission was to verify the uranium deposit for the Third Reich. The U-boats prowling the St. Lawrence River weren't just there to arbitrarily sink merchant ships. They were providing the logistics, the distraction, and the muscle for a covert nuclear resource extraction operation.
Which brings us to the terrifying, inescapable conclusion about the Liberator Harry. Madeleine Arsenault had the report. She was flying it back to Ottawa. Perhaps she had discovered the treason and was going to blow the whistle. Perhaps she was going to alert the real, uncompromised authorities in the RCMP. And so the crash of the Harry wasn't an accident caused by severe weather. It was deliberately brought down either by sabotage before takeoff or by false radio navigation beams to destroy Madeleine's report and protect the secret of the triumvirate. 24 innocent Canadian airmen were essentially murdered by their own defense establishment to protect a post-war financial patent. It's sickening. And to understand how a conspiracy of this magnitude could operate so brazenly, we have to look at the broader shadow war happening on Canadian soil, because you have to understand the absolute paranoia of the home front in 1943.
Right. We tend to think of World War II happening over there in Europe or the Pacific, a distant conflict. But the war was in Canada. It was physically in the St. Lawrence River. The military logs show U-boat attacks happening within sight of the Canadian coast. In 1942, the U-513 and the U-518 attacked Bell Island in Newfoundland. They sank massive iron ore ships. The SS Saginaga, the SS Rosecastle, dozens of sailors were killed right off the coast.
And the government heavily censored this.
Why censor it? I mean, people could literally see it happening. Panic. Absolute uncontrollable civilian panic. If the public knew that the Royal Canadian Navy couldn't even protect ships a mile from shore, the war effort would collapse. Locals in the Gaspé Peninsula and Newfoundland could see the ships burning on the horizon at night. They could see the flames on the water washing up on their beaches. But they were forced by law to stay silent. The newspapers wouldn't report it. It created this suffocating atmosphere of dread. The enemy was literally in their backyard, and the government was telling them to look the other way and pretend everything was fine.
And it wasn't just submarines off the coast. There were literal spies walking among them. The sources detail the Abwehr, the German military intelligence agency, landing real spies in Canada, men like Werner von Janowski. He was dropped off by the U-518 in New Carlisle, Quebec. And the only reason he was caught is because he went to a local hotel and paid with outdated Canadian currency that the Abwehr had given him, which aroused the suspicion of the hotel clerk.
Exactly. And once captured, the RCMP turned him into a double agent under a program called Operation Watchdog. They used him to feed false information back to Germany.
And remember, those phantom radio signals intercepted by the RCMP, the ones tied back to the strange distress call near the Matawan River 6 days after the crash. The airwaves over Canada were thick with encrypted radio waves, espionage, and counter-espionage. Everyone was listening, and absolutely no one trusted anyone.
Which brings in the human factor and the deep social fracture running right through the heart of Quebec at the time. The conscription crisis. This is vital to understanding the environment of the Laurentian Mountains.
Let's expand on that, because the conscription crisis was a massive socio-political event. You had this intense cultural and linguistic divide. Francophones in Quebec felt completely alienated from the British Empire. They felt they were being treated as second-class citizens by the Anglophone government in Ottawa, and many violently refused to be conscripted to fight a war they felt wasn't theirs. They didn't want to die for a British king.
And when the government started forcing conscription, thousands of young Francophone men fled. They became known as les insoumis, the objectors. And where did they hide? In the dense, freezing, impenetrable Laurentian forests. They built hidden camps, surviving off the land, constantly terrified of being hunted down by military police.
And here we enter the profound gray areas of morality, because who knows those forests better than the men hiding in them? Were these hidden conscripts the first to reach the crash site of the Liberator Harry, long before the military accidentally found it in 1946?
There are troubling testimonies buried in the local archives. Persistent, dark rumors from the remote villages around Saint Donat that locals, perhaps the objectors hiding in the woods, perhaps just desperate opportunists, reached the crash site within days. And the rumors say they looted the bodies of the airmen, stealing cash, service watches, wedding rings, jewelry from the charred remains.
That is incredibly dark, stealing from dead soldiers. The local police chief at the time fiercely denied it, claiming the terrain was too rugged for any locals to reach in the middle of winter. But years later, bullets and personal relics from the crew were found miles away from the crash site, in areas where the plane didn't scatter debris.
Let's put ourselves in their shoes for a moment. Imagine the immense psychological weight of that situation. You are a young man, 18 or 19 years old, hiding in the freezing woods, cut off from your family because you refuse to cross the ocean to kill or be killed. You are living in constant fear. And suddenly, in the dead of night, the very war you are running from falls out of the sky in a burning inferno. A colossal bomber crashes right into your sanctuary. What do? Do you run toward the fire to help, risking exposure and arrest? Do you hide deeper in the woods? Or if you are freezing and starving, do you scavenge the dead to survive? Paints a picture of a home front that was fractured, desperate, and operating completely outside the bounds of the heroic official propaganda.
It really does. It shows how messy survival is. But the conspiracy, the real rot at the core of this story, didn't just stay in the Canadian woods. It spread across the ocean, straight to the bloody front lines of Italy.
Okay, so Audit is stuck. He's hit a bureaucratic wall in Ottawa. The CNR won't talk. Colonel Price is breathing down his neck.
Yeah.
How do we actually know about this triumvirate and the Bermuda shell companies? Who finally cracked the secret?
To answer that, we have to leave the Canadian woods and look at transgenerational warfare. We have to look at a legendary military unit known as the Devil's Brigade.
Yes, the first Special Service Force. A joint Canadian-American commando unit. These guys were a completely different breed of soldier.
They were lethal. The Germans called them the Black Devils. The military deliberately recruited lumberjacks, miners, park rangers, hunters, men who knew how to survive in the absolute worst conditions. They were armed with the V-42 stiletto, right? I read about this. It was a terrifying combat knife designed specifically with a thumb depression on the handle for driving the blade upward into the rib cage for silent, immediate kills. They operated almost exclusively at night, painting their faces with black boot polish to eliminate any glare. And they engaged in severe, calculated psychological warfare. They would silently infiltrate German camps, eliminate the sentries in the trenches, and then leave these macabre calling cards on the bodies. A little sticker with their unit logo and the words printed in German, Das dicke Ende kommt nach. The worst is yet to come.
They were explicitly designed to strike absolute terror into the enemy. But the tragic irony of this story is, what happens when the terror, the betrayal, comes from behind your own lines? In December 1943, the Devil's Brigade is fighting at Monte la Difensa in Italy. It is a brutal, bloody, near-suicidal ascent of a freezing, muddy mountain under heavy artillery fire. And during the chaos of the battle, a young Canadian commando named James McRae captures a German quartermaster's satchel from a bunker.
Now, here is the incredible coincidence, or perhaps fate. James McRae is the son of Duncan McRae. Duncan is a senior war contracts inspector back in Ottawa, a man who has been quietly, independently investigating the Dominion Resources shell companies and hitting dead ends. James opens this captured German satchel in the freezing mud of Italy looking for tactical maps, and instead he finds the missing link to his father's investigation. He finds copies of the Bermuda Shell Company contracts. And he finds a handwritten note explicitly confirming the Martin Bay uranium deposit and confirming the deliberate destruction of the RCAF flight, the Liberator Harry. The note chillingly says, "Tell your father Geneva still stands."
The sins of the fathers literally bleeding into the mud of the son's battlefield. James McRae reads these documents, and he realizes with absolute horror that his commanding liaison officer, a man named Oliver Cavendish, is the son of Sir Edward Cavendish, the corrupt Montreal banker from the Triumvirate.
Oliver Cavendish is right there in Italy, embedded in the command structure, actively filtering intelligence. He is ensuring that any reports about Labrador or the uranium or the Swedish middleman captured on the front lines never make it back to Allied high command. James even discovers that Oliver recently allowed a wounded British SOE agent to be taken off a medical evacuation list and left to die.
Let me just clarify SOE for a moment. That's the Special Operations Executive. Essentially, Winston Churchill's secret army designed to conduct espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance in occupied Europe.
Right, highly trained spies. And Oliver let this agent die simply because the agent had acquired intelligence about the Swedish middleman facilitating the uranium sale. Oliver murdered an Allied intelligence agent to protect his father's treason.
If we analyze the emotional core of this discovery, it is absolutely devastating. James McRae is risking his life every single night, painting his face black, fighting hand-to-hand in the freezing Italian mud, watching his brothers in arms die. And he realizes that the real enemy isn't just the German soldier in the opposite trench. Sometimes the deadliest enemy is the man in the bespoke suit in the Ottawa office or the Geneva bank, who is calmly betraying his own soldiers to ensure his post-war profit margin remains intact.
It's the ultimate tension between strict legality and moral justice. The men who ordered the destruction of the Harry, the men who sold out the country, are protected by the law, by the War Measures Act, by their elite status. The men dying on the mountain or in the bomber are just statistics to them.
Which brings us right back to Ottawa and to Corporal Audit, who is discovering exactly how impenetrable that legal protection truly is.
Yeah.
Audit pushes his shadow investigation too hard. He asks too many questions about Madeleine Arsenal, and the system finally bites back.
He is summoned, not by a low-level clerk, but by Colonel Harwood Price, the head of administrative security for the Military Intelligence Division. And the scene breakdown of this meeting in Audit's notes is chilling. It's not a screaming, violent interrogation. It's worse. It's a sterile, quiet office. Audit notes that there are 3 clocks on the wall behind the colonel's desk, and deliberately none of them show the exact same time.
It's a calculated psychological tactic. It's designed to disorient you, to make you feel like you are losing your grip on reality, that in this room, they control even the flow of time.
Colonel Price speaks entirely in polite bureaucratic euphemisms. He doesn't pull a gun. He doesn't threaten Audit with a court-martial. He says with quiet, terrifying politeness, "Your questions are dangerous, Corporal. For you." And then he delivers the ultimate institutional blockade regarding Madeleine and the Harry. He says, the file is closed. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it is closed. The nuance is important.
That night, Audit goes back to a small boarding house, and he finds his room has been tossed. Not violently destroyed, but meticulously searched. Things are just slightly out of place. They wanted him to know they were there. They wanted him to feel the omnipresence of the state. He realizes, in that terrifying moment, that the system will absolutely crush him. He is a 22-year-old grieving corporal up against the entire unfathomable machinery of the military-industrial complex.
So he makes an agonizing choice, a choice between survival and justice. He takes his notebook, the intricate diagrams of the crash site, the timeline of the U-boat, the notes on the phantom signal, the name of the empty grave, and he hides it. He gives it to an old, trusted World War I veteran from his hometown, a man named Arthur Glenfield, with strict instructions to release it to a journalist only if Audit suddenly disappears or suffers a fatal accident. And then Audit officially surrenders the high-heeled shoe to Colonel Price.
He walks into the sterile office, places the premium leather shoe on the desk, and walks away without a word. It's a partial, silent victory. He survives the war, and his notes survive to eventually be declassified decades later, but the truth remains buried for a lifetime. It's an agonizing compromise.
And as we look back on this, we have to reflect on the tragic reality of the victims who were left behind. The 24 men on that mountain. Because of the intense fire of the crash and because of the institutional secrecy and the military's desperate rush to close the book on the Harry before anyone asked too many questions, 21 of the 24 men were never formally identified by forensics. They were just buried in a mass grave right there on the mountain, based entirely on who was listed on the manifest. The military just assumed they were there and shoveled the dirt over them.
They became forgotten relics of a shadow war. Men who died not fighting the enemy, but sacrificed as collateral damage by their own leaders. And the tragedy didn't even end in 1946. The sources mention a bizarre, deeply unsettling event in 1985. The mass grave at Montigny Noir was desecrated. Someone went up the mountain and dug it up.
Were they just sick grave robbers looking for macabre souvenirs? Or was someone, decades later, still looking for missing gold, or that leather briefcase, or physical evidence of who was actually on that plane?
We may never know for sure. But the institutional mishandling of the dead continued even into the modern era. Decades later, during a government-funded renovation of the memorial site, Administrative bungling led to an overarching Christian cross being placed over the specific marker for Jacob Silverstein, who was a Jewish airman. It shows that the institution is still, decades later, completely failing to properly honor the specifics of the individual lives that were lost. The tragedy is still being mishandled by the bureaucracy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, why should you care today? Why does a convoluted cold case from 1943 matter to you right now? Because this story highlights the eternal, brutal struggle between the official narrative propagated by those in power and the messy, often suppressed truth. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What happens when an institution closes a file? When they stamp it restricted access? What exactly is left behind in the dark?
It challenges our fundamental understanding of history. We are taught history as a series of grand, sweeping narratives, good versus evil, the Allies versus the Axis. But this reminds us that those narratives are often built on the manufactured silences of individuals. And it shows that ordinary people, a 22-year-old grieving corporal with a notebook, a 28-year-old brilliant female geologist with a briefcase, are very often the only ones standing between the truth and total, irreversible erasure.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. A lingering, deeply unsettling mystery drawn straight from the final pages of audit's documents. Before she vanished, before the plane crashed, Madeleine Arsenault managed to send an anonymous letter to an RCMP inspector she trusted. And the letter didn't just warn about the uranium, it said this: the uranium wasn't the real secret. What else the geologists found in that bay that they will never tell you?
As if high-grade uranium wasn't enough to kill 24 men for. What else could possibly be in Martin Bay that was more valuable or more terrifying than the raw material for an atomic bomb? And furthermore, when James McRae captured those Bermuda contracts in Italy, he found a fifth name listed among the shareholders of the conspiracy. We know the unholy triumvirate was Holt, Cavendish, and the Dominion president, but the fifth name was listed simply as P. Arsenal, Hull, Quebec.
A single francophone name in a massive, entirely anglophone banking and military conspiracy. And Madeleine's last name was Arsenal. She was from Hull, who is P. Arsenal. Was her own family involved in the treason that ultimately led to her death? Was she betrayed by her own blood?
The vast, frozen Canadian wilderness still holds so many forgotten relics. The snow covers a lot of sins. And somewhere out there, perhaps locked away in encrypted, dusty archives in Ottawa, or perhaps buried deep under the unforgiving ice of Labrador, the true, ultimate defense secret of Martin Bay is still waiting to be found.